Okay, everyone, good afternoon and welcome back to Event Organisers Live, and our afternoon discussion panel, Safeguarding Events, Stand Design, Health and Safety, is with Chris Skeith, the CEO of the AEO, Nick Morgan, CEO of We Are the Fair and We Are Placemaking and Vice Chair of the BVEP, and Kerrie Kemp, Regional Operations Director, EMEA for Informa Markets. Now, if you do have any questions for our panellists, do pop them in the little Q&A box, which you will see at the bottom. Now, I'm just going to give a quick introduction to our panelists before we jump straight into the meaty questions. So Chris, as you know, is the CEO of the Association of Event Organisers, which is the leading association for organisers of events in the UK and internationally. He started his career in media auditing at the Audit Bureau of Circulations, where he later led on the development of their auditing products for the events sector. He holds a seat on the government's Events Industry Board Committee and is Vice Chair and Treasurer of the Business Visits and Events Partnership, which is a partnership for all leading associations in the events industry, representing the sector, the government and regulators. He's also an UFI board member and chair of the associations, and sometimes he even sits down to relax. Then, of course, we have Nick Morgan, CEO of We Are the Fair and We Are Placemaking, and he's got more than 23 years experience across large-scale event production, licensing and health and safety within the public realm, large-scale events and festivals. Now, Nick wears many hats. He sits on the Council of the National Outdoor Events Association, a board member on the Association of Independent Festivals, a vice chair on the Business Visits and Events Partnership, and a member of the NTIA, and strongly believes that the informal events industry, an industry that is worth over $5 billion to the UK every year, should be championed, developed and supported by government. Has a very direct line to DCMS and Public Health England workforce as well. Kerrie Kemp has worked on exhibition operations her entire life, and now with experience spanning over 20 years in the field. This time, Kerrie's progressed from operations assistant through to her current role as regional ops director for the EMEA region. During this period, she's worked for organisers including IMARC, VNU Exhibitions, Ithaca Media, UBM, and subsequently now Informa Markets. Her EMEA ops team is comprised of around 50 professionals spread across the UK, Europe, Middle East, Turkey and Egypt, covering multiple markets from B2B to consumer. Okay, so a bit of a mouthful, so maybe it's time for some of you guys to do some talking as well. And I think, Chris, if I can start with you, because I know that Channel 4 might be knocking on your door and that you may need to leave us at short notice. So we'll get something in from you from the off. Look, this week we've received some fairly devastating news that events are not going to return this autumn, maybe not for another 6 months. How do you respond to this, and what does it mean really for the exhibition sector as far as you're concerned?
Gosh, there's many different angles to this. There's one angle that it's incredibly unjust and unfair. So clearly we're taking a political approach. We're one of 5 sectors that have not been allowed to open by the government. So there's clearly an angle of understanding their thought processes, their decision-making processes. But clearly public health is really, really important, and you're managing a pandemic, which nobody's had to do before. But I think that brings me on to the second point, which is probably what we're going to be talking about a bit more today, that we've proven the safety case. Our COVID safe exhibitions have been proven. So, you know, we'll be lobbying for an earlier date for sure, because we've been able to show measures far in excess of other things that other people have been doing. And I guess the last point, as people know, I always try and be half full rather than half empty. You know, if we do know that's the actual start date that we've got to work to, obviously we need clarity of exactly what that is. We can then step back and start to build and plan, but we obviously need some support package, which was notable in its absence from Rishi's statements a few minutes ago, which is why I may have to disappear for some press comment. But we've clearly been not allowed to trade and need to get some support to get there. So, you know, we've proven the safety case. The announcements are clearly not helpful, but potentially if we get some support to get us through to when we can trade and we get some idea of the decision-making process about what that looks like, then at least we can actually plan. Because at the moment it's just as event businesses we rely on certainty. We rely on forward planning. We need to build confidence with our customers, etc. So, you could argue that we inevitably will make the best of what we've got, because that's what we do as an industry. But hopefully that little muddled mess of information was quite useful and somewhat answered the question in hopefully a reasonably positive way. I'm clearly not going to say exactly how I feel, because that would not be broadcastable.
Nick, if I could maybe come to you then. I mean, it's been a bad week for all of us as far as your outdoor event community is concerned. I mean, this is going to have a drastic impact, considering so many organisers operate on an annual basis. 2021 perhaps already looking a little bit ropey, shall we say?
Yeah, I wouldn't say it was the best news, obviously. Yeah, I think the difficulty and the frustration with the outdoor is just, we've been lobbying for a roadmap, some sort of definitive start date, which I know is difficult, during a pandemic. But, if I'm being told by PHE that the amount of information I have is in parallel to what they do, given this is their, I imagine, full-time role, modeling data, there should be something and some form of parallel discussion in terms of what that looks like. The difficulty is it's obviously unnerved the whole market. Why would any promoter at this point commit any funds? And I think there's a real danger now that it's going to suppress the planning into potentially 3 to 4 months, which on shows, for example, we're involved with, where you've got 20, 30,000 people, it's just not feasible. So without that, and I think DCMS just don't understand the planning cycle. We don't just wake up on a Monday, turn up to site, deliver an event on the Friday. We are working now on licensing applications for next year, this time next year, for May next year. And it's just going to put infinite more pressure onto, operators or production or producers such as ourselves. So, it's really devastating. It's really frustrating. We've been speaking to public health for months about this and just feel like we're, being ignored, both on the roadmap, but also, as Chris has already alluded to, just in terms of support. It's really lacking. And I think it was almost insulting, the statement that's just come out from Rishi, because there's no revenue coming through these businesses. So how can we fund any proportion of that person's salary? I think is the challenge.
Yeah, absolutely, good point. And so, Kerrie, that sort of brings me on then to you then for a summary from your perspective. Nick's hit the nail on the head. That you don't just turn up and run the event. It takes months of planning, and someone in your role as of operations, you'll know about that more than anyone.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we're looking at lead times of at least 3 months, ideally 6 for some of our bigger events. And it just throws into question everything for, what does the calendar look like for 2021? How do our teams react to that? How can they start to plan for that? Operationally, we work on definitives, the show will always open at that time because that's our job. But now to have that, those times so much in limbo, despite all of the hard work and, the successful pilots and everything that we've worked on with the all secure guidance and things, to still have the carpet whipped from under us it's devastating. It really is.
Yeah, no doubt at all. Nick, I'm going to come back to you if I can. Outdoor events had been permitted to run. There'd been seen some trials of some socially distanced examples of festivals and so on. Has that changed too now? Are they now not allowed? And is there any information or advice that outdoor organisers who had been able to do something, is there any advice you think they could give to businesses who are unable to run live events at all right now?
Yeah, I mean, I think there is a bit of a myth around, there's lots of people saying that outdoor events, were enabled because there was some EIF guidance. The problem is how that was interpreted nationally at localized level has differed hugely. Just like when the Licensing Act was brought in 2003, we still have, very disparate views. So the truth is, yeah, there have been some successful events. I mean, people talk about, things like Newcastle, which was heavily sponsored by Virgin. The reality is those shows, if that's the new normal, and you start to run the budgets and the infrastructure costs that are needed to run them, COVID safe, they just don't stack up. You know, we work on large shows, you know, obviously big talent. Our margins on that, you know, for the promoters are working off being able, or the ability to sell 90% of tickets, you know, and lots of people are saying, you know, just increase footprint. These things do not work in terms of the financial viability. So, you know, there's a lot of myth of, you know, that, yeah, we've all restarted as a sector. It really hasn't been the case. And then now, you know, there's such uncertainty, and I mean, everyone's heard of the example of like the boat show, but, you know, that's just more financial exposure. Why would anyone go to that degree of which they undertook and then get closed down or serve notice the day before? Because effectively you're so committed at cost at that point. It's just unnerved the whole sector. You know, all of our, we've got 128 shows, of which I don't know one of those promoters that wants to have any financial exposure until they know that, you know, whether this roadmap is ever going to be readily available to us. So, yeah.
Yeah, really, really unsettling times. Chris, if I could come back to you while you're still with us. There's kind of much uncertainty for event organisers and venue as to sort of COVID secure policies. You know, it's been adapted from 2 metre to 1 metre with mitigation, and a lot of time and resource has been implemented into the plan to get large business events open once now the pilots had been completed. With this, anyway, there's a rule on 30 that still stands. How can we ensure businesses and venues kind of stay open and tread water until we're allowed to go again, I guess, is what I'm trying to ask.
Well, I think there's a number of strands to that. If I could just pick up on a point about the boat show, you know,
Sure.
It was Boat Show B that got shut down, which was already significantly reduced from the other area. And what's really concerning, to echo Nick's point, is that PHE in Southampton and the council were involved in almost hourly dialogue with that organiser to get the event going. So to have it pulled at that last element is really bad, and we're taking that directly up with government to say that decision-making process needs to be revised. Otherwise, there's no confidence at all with people. Back to what people can do in the interim. I mean, that's a really tough one. You know, viable was used a lot in Rishi's statement, and to have I don't know, Business Design Centre, Earls Court, NEC, you know, have a big exhibition and conference centre open just for meetings of 30 people isn't really viable. So we need a different support package. We need something bespoke to us. We're one of 5 sectors not open. There's a frustration of trade that the government is imposing. So we need to urgently continue our plea for a specific support package, because otherwise those businesses just won't be around to service us at the other side. And that's just the venues. The suppliers are in a, they've not had any money since March at the very earliest. The freelancers have been completely scot-free of any of the support that keeps getting talked about by government. So that specific support package that covers all the people in the supply chain, there's the freelancers, the suppliers, the venues and the organiser, we need to tread water. And the reason why we need to tread water is that we literally just turn the tap off. You know, it's not our fault that we cannot trade. It's the government that has turned the tap off. So we're putting the utmost pressure that we possibly can right through to the senior levels of government to give us that, because they need us on the other side. 11 billion economic impact just for trade and consumer shows, nearly 40 billion for business events overall, and 70 billion for the overall event sector, as reported by BVEP. 9.1 million visitors, 178,000 exhibitors that use exhibitions to trade. They are doing it. And our problem is that we were all very good at what we did, and we all very quietly got on and did it, and we weren't going to the government all the time for help and support and guidance. So, you know, it was admitted in a meeting with the Secretary of State, Oliver Dowden, and Nigel Huddleston just last week, that, and at the UK Start event, that Nigel said that actually as a sector we've quietly got on with it. So more are bad for not shouting more, but we need that interim support to get through to that point. It's purely a sticking plaster with the meetings of 30, and going forward there's lots of opportunity. So we have guidance on a risk assessed basis that we can use to look at the social distancing measures, but there's bigger opportunity with testing, for example. So if we're able to get ourselves in a testing system like 22nd at Heathrow or whatever it is, if we can prove people are COVID free before they get in, and all the social distancing stuff gets out the window, and then you end up being back to your viable business models, number of delegates and floor layouts, etc., that are safe, that need it. So if we're going to have to learn to live with the virus, and if that means in the short term some social distancing when we're allowed to trade again, that's cool. But in the mid-term, we need to be looking at how we can manage it going forward, and testing is something that we're working on, both directly with government, but also individually. There's a group of people looking at that aspect, so that enables us to manage working with the virus as we go along in the short and mid-term, until there's a vaccine found in the longer term.
Yeah, absolutely, minefield. Kerrie, maybe I'd get your sort of kind of off-script view on that as someone involved in operations. What, I mean, how do you kind of interpret the rules? Do you look at it and think, oh my God, this is just, you know, how are we going to deal with this, you know, implement all these kind of rules and changes into my event whenever they're allowed to run? Or are you actually more laid back about it and say, well, this is what we do, we adapt anyway?
Yeah, well, I think, look, any ops professional would tell you that you're not worth your grain of salt unless you take a risk-based approach to everything. So for us, this is just another risk that we have to assess. It's something that we have to break it down into manageable chunks and focus on each of the subjects, you know, and each of the areas within it, and come up with a resolution. The advantage, I guess, if we were to have to look for an advantage, the advantage is we've now got the time to do that and to really work through the level of detail required for each of those different categories. I think, you know, operationally, adaptability has always been one of our key strengths, and being able to think outside the box. There's been plenty of times when any number of ops people would have been on site and they've been thrown a scenario that they've never had to deal with before, and they've come up with a solution. Unfortunately for us, this just happens to be a next one on the list. And so I think you have to be pragmatic. We have plenty of experts within our industry. We have plenty of, you know, health and safety is through and through. Everything we do already has been. This is just another approach to that, and it has to, and we have to remain firm on that. We know that what we've pulled together as part of the All Secure framework, we know that the way that we implemented that in a live event environment with the pilot event, we know, we were told that that was everything, that the measures that we'd suggested were fantastic, that they would look to transfer that to other sectors. So we have to hold fast with that belief, and just, you know, time will tell.
Absolutely. Nick, if I come back to you, kind of perhaps maybe on a more, I don't know, informal or formal basis, what are you sort of hearing from organisers at the moment? Do they have any specific requests or demands from government? Like, in practical terms, what do they need to kind of survive?
Yeah, I mean, there's two things. One is obviously financial support, which we've, you know, spoken about at large. Yeah, because it's all very, you know, it's obviously important that we don't have mass redundancies across the sector, but also those businesses, given the fact their revenue on average has probably dropped by 92%, you know, they need to be able to fund, you know, this additional makeup that's requested. So I think that's really, really important, that there needs to be some focus on the actual businesses themselves. At the moment, understandably, it's very employee based, and I think their opening sort of mandate at the beginning of this was, you know, unlike 2008 where they felt they supported the businesses, you know, they wanted to support the employees, but businesses need to be able, need cash flow, they need money, and they don't want to just onboard loads of debt. You know, as a business owner myself, why would I onboard as much debt as possible to then pay it off over the next 5-10 years? You know, that's almost madness if I spoke to RFD. And then secondly, it is a more definitive roadmap, you know, and it's putting out some form of how that looks like. So whether it's test and trace, etc. But I think with testing on an event, you know, in our sort of circumstances where there's 20,000 people, there's a lot of other things to look at. So if some of the suggestions have been like test on the gate, you know, that's going to have an incremental impact in terms of like queuing time. And then you've got to look at if those people have come through the mass transit system to get to that event, you know, and affected people effectively on the way, you know, how realistic is that? So, you know, you're saying, because there's an incubation period that obviously sits behind that testing. So, you know, if they've all been on the tube together, for example, then come to the gate and obviously at that time test negative and then enter the event, you know, and then for whatever reason they're a super spreader, or, you know, it hasn't, you know, it hasn't indicated at the gate, you know, there's a huge risk, especially on where there's a dwell time of say 6 or 8 hours, or a camping festival, which is over a weekend. Obviously people could present symptoms. So I think, you know, for me, it is looking at, as callous as it sounds, this livable disease, and protecting, you know, protecting the most vulnerable, and effectively, you know, controlling the disease. Whereas at the moment, the disease is controlling us, it feels like, at a government level. And we need to look at that mode. And public health, you know, they don't say it very vocally or in the public domain, but on a lot of calls seem to be going towards that. And you're seeing people like the BBC are starting to peddle that narrative. So yeah, you know, that it needs to be more skewed towards that, I feel, because for us, it's really, really challenging. And promoters just, you know, they aren't going to commit to next season at the moment. They're really, really nervous, understandably.
And that's the risk. I mean, you know, worst case, they don't commit to next season. What happens next season? This is the worry, isn't it?
Yeah, and then the next thing is obviously now people ringing me saying, well, I'm going to move my May, June, July show to September. You know, the reality is you could have, you know, 2,000 shows all trying to deliver in 3 weekends. You know, there's not enough inventory in this country that can support that. And obviously the exhibition market also will be pulling on that inventory, which they ordinarily might not do, like extra sanitary provision, etc. So, you know, there has to be some realism. And there just isn't this understanding at DCMS level of how the event sector works, I feel.
Yeah, Chris, is that something that you would agree with? What are you kind of hearing from exhibition organisers now? I mean, it's all well and good saying, oh, we'll push our shows back to autumn like they were doing earlier this year, but there isn't the infrastructure. And God forbid, if this does drag out for much longer, there might not even be the supplier base to support half of the events.
And a slight fundamental thing over and above all of that, which is the Nightingales, which, you know, thankfully they were there to support the NHS when it was needed to deal with this sort of pandemic there. So I think, yeah, it's almost getting secular in terms of the conversations. So there was a race to postpone, there was a race to rearrange. Then you're almost back into the annual cycle. There was a concern on kit. I think the biggest concern currently is people and losing skills. I mean, you know, we estimate 80% job loss. We employ 114,000 direct just in trade and consumer shows. The supply chain is looking at, you know, whether they're going to actually survive past the end of furlough. And ESSA has published some figures that indicate some 67% of members won't be reopening at the end of that. So, you know, yes, there's a critical concern about our supply chain, and the organisers and venues are looking at how we can support them through there, and that's in terms of people skills. I mean, LinkedIn's like reading an obituary of all the people that have been faces of organisations, that all that market knowledge and insight and workarounds and way of creating safe environments are disappearing and moving on to other things. So there's a risk of them moving to other sectors. Yes, there is a potential kit things, but I think there's also again, being the half full person, you know, there is an opportunity to look at doing things differently. You know, ask our suppliers, you know, how can we do things better? You know, why do we always find these workarounds to do something in a particular way? And leading on from Kerrie's perspective about really refining our systems and our processes and making sure that we're as pin sharp as we can be. So I think at the other side of it, we can come out, you know, a little bit more match fit. I think we can be a bit more realistic, but we do need to work as well with our customers as well. So all the confidence point is huge, but how can we take the risk away from them? You know, whether it be testing, or whether it be some insurance, or whether it's some certainty of planning. But one thing is for sure, we have got to live with this virus, and we've got to be agile. We've got to be as agile with the virus as it is with being with us. So we've got to be able to make sort of changes quicker. So our businesses need to change in their structure and their how they cope. But you know, there's lots, again, there is lots of opportunity. I mean, I'm super excited about what AEO could be doing at the other side, how we can deliver more value for less money across a broader church across the world, how we can connect with our members a lot more efficiently. So, you know, there's lots of learnings that we've had in this crazy time. But I think everybody realistically is still in crisis mode at the moment. We need to start those foundations of building the confidence in our own businesses, in our own people, not lose that talent going forward. And then the kit bit, I think, will sort of come later. But I think the events will look somewhat different, certainly in the indoor side, but that's not necessarily a bad thing, because we can do a better, cheaper, more effective service for our exhibitors as well, to make sure they get maximum bang for their buck and their investment in the live event as well. So yeah, it will look different, but I think it will look better, and the opportunities are really quite exciting. Just need to survive to get there first.
You do, and I think, you know, the Chancellor said today, this is my 4th of 5 sessions, but in the break, I spent my break watching the Chancellor's speech, and he signed off, I'll read it: "We must learn to live with it, the coronavirus, and live without fear." So let's hope that the government practice what they preach and let us do our jobs. Before we move to audience questions, I've got one more question I want to aim at you, Kerrie. Kind of like moving towards 2021 and beyond, you know, from an operation, you know, director's point of view, we've now sort of identified level of risk acceptance that we're sort of comfortable with. What top line measures should we be implementing, you know, during and after events, like imagining we can run them, say, from March and COVID is still a threat of some manner?
Yeah, I think firstly, just to kind of follow on a little bit from Chris's point, a big issue for me at the moment is, you know, as an operations director, my biggest asset is my people and the team that work for us. And a key part of that is obviously being able to build that resilience. So how do you take people that thrive from being on site and thrive from running physical events and put them in an office-based environment for ultimately a year, and then still expect them to have the resilience and adaptability to be able to then flick the switch from working in their living room or spare room for 12 months to then being able to go on site and deliver an event for 15, 20 days on site with sort of 14-hour days. So, you know, a lot of that resilience, which may prior to this have been built up over many years, is going to have naturally slipped away during this period. So for me, that's a big concern when I think about my preparation, when I think about how we adapt for the future. Notwithstanding then on top of that, you know, as an industry, we look at the level of redundancies, we look at the level of attrition. You know, we already had an issue as an industry attracting talent into some disciplines and maintaining that talent and keeping that over years. And I think this is just going to exaggerate that even further. Then when I think about the kind of specific measures, I mean, how long is a piece of string in some instances? There's, you know, the All Secure framework was meant to be exactly that. It was meant to be a framework that was then adapted to each business as suitable. So the way that we're approaching it is there's not a one size fits all for every Informa event. I've got 70 something events that sit within my portfolio, and there's 70 something approaches to the All Secure guidance. So, but there's some top line principles that I think we can all look at. You know, everyone's heard the scary stories about we're all going to have 10% of visitors and everyone's going to be operating in one-way systems and timed access and all the rest of it. But I think what we proved with the pilot event was it could be a number of those things, or it could be none of those things. And depending on where we land with, you know, with the 2 meter versus 1.5 meter versus 1 meter versus quick testing on site, I mean, any number of those things could be in place or couldn't be in place. And this again is part of the issue. The goalposts are consistently moving. So I noticed on the Q&A that someone said, you know, should we be spending this time investing in Perspex screens and everything? Well, my answer would be no, because, you know, that Perspex screen requirement next week could go away, next month could go away, or it could indeed still be here in 6 months. But I think we just have to keep moving with it as much as we can, being agile, being practical, applying all of our kind of knowledge and experience and expertise to it. And just, you know, the kind of the speech that I gave my team yesterday when we were all together is focus on what you can control, focus on what you know, apply your knowledge and expertise there, and then, you know, everything else will have to come in time, because this week has taught us nothing that it's hugely frustrating, but we could be thrown a curveball at any point. And so you can plan to within an inch, and then it will all get whipped out anyway. So I think, yeah, for me, that would be where I would put the advice.
Absolutely. Guys, that was really, really interesting. I've got some audience questions that have come through. Some are harder than others to answer. So it's a bit of a potluck. We'll throw the grenades in there and see what happens. I quite like this one at the top from our good friend, anonymous attendee, who keeps popping up everywhere. And it's very simple. It says, due to the recent announcement, do you foresee more virtual events taking place now? And I'm going to add my own layer onto that. Nick, I'll come to you first if I can. If the event is an experience, and like virtual alternatives sometimes they're just not good enough, are they? Do you think many people in your marketplace are even entertaining the idea of doing virtual festivals and other such things?
I mean, in truth, what we sell as both producer and promoter is that sense of coming together and tribalism, for want of a better word. So, you know, people are purchasing that ticket to be, you know, in their own, you know, social circles, with friends, meet new people. So I think, you know, for us, I mean, it's fairly unique. I think there will be, though, the opportunity in terms of like a hybrid format where, you know, if we had, say, headline talent that hadn't toured a particular region, you know, say a band that hadn't been to Argentina on tour, then there is opportunity for promoters to extend revenue by obviously having an online presence. So potentially, but, you know, there are huge costs, you know, it has to be broadcast quality. It's not as simple as that. There has to be a huge negotiation with, you know, agents, because obviously they'll want some rev share on that. But I think, yeah, going forward, but on some shows, you know, it wouldn't necessarily be relevant, but on large shows where you've got big talent, potentially there is an opportunity to, you know, have a global audience. You know, not everybody, and maybe with COVID, can obviously travel, as we well know. But I don't think it will ever replace. I can't see people just sitting at home for a whole weekend. You know, I mean, Zoom's bad enough, but yeah, having to sit through and watch it on a screen. It's just, we're not selling that experience.
I can imagine pitching the tent in the middle of the living room. No barbecues.
Let's hope not. I mean, if that is the case, believe me, I'll be retiring very soon.
Yeah, my God, perish the thought. Chris, what about you from the exhibitions kind of side? I think, you know, my kind of immediate area has been conferences, which I think is much easier to sort of manage and, you know, sort out online, such as this. But an exhibition is a much harder discipline to sort of corral in an online environment. What do you think?
Well, somebody said to me years ago, everybody's talked about this 365 engagement for events, and somebody said to me, oh, well, you only get them to sign up for 3 days of the show, which I think, if anything, this pandemic's proved that's not the case. You know, an event organizer, an exhibition organizer, is in the business of bringing communities together. They happen to choose the most profitable way, and in my view, the best way, which is live and face-to-face. You can use the 5 senses. So I think whether it's hybrid or solely digital, there will be more digital engagement with customers, which provides more value. We'll be able to get a much more sophisticated sales process. It won't just be the FOMO effect of always going because you've always gone. But what's also interesting, there's been some research done by UFI of 9,000 exhibitors, and 67% of those said that they have felt that not being able to engage live, face-to-face, to do business, to meet people, to be inspired, to do all the wonderful things that there are when you meet live, has impacted their business. And furthermore, 91% of those 9,000 people have gone into doing a virtual event instead, because that's all you can do, and it didn't cut the mustard. They're still demanding of getting back to live. So I think what you're actually going to find is organisers, some do it really well, some have got also quite good online buying platforms, some engagement platforms, but they were probably less commonplace than they will become. But if you remember the why, why are you an exhibition organizer? It's about looking after your community of buyers and sellers and putting them together. Now what we're able to do is look at an opportunity whereby all of those different elements, you're going to be using different tools to be able to look through those and use those. So some will be live, some will be digital, some will be Zoom, some will be sponsored content, some will be podcasts. So all there's going to be a rich mix of things that have been done. And back to that comment of a few years ago, I think now people are giving permission for more engagement with more valuable content. So I think that we'll be almost agnostic of platform, but primarily we're going to still be a face-to-face business, because there's nothing wrong with the medium. We've just been told we can't use it.
Absolutely. I think we've got time for one more question, and I think, Kerrie, I'd like to aim this one towards you. Oh, it's an anonymous attendee again. It reads, some exhibition companies have been told to restrict numbers and have staggered entry times. Certainly we're seeing that across Europe, but in the UK, when we're allowed to run, that will probably be likely. How will that affect the buzz and atmosphere at exhibitions, do you think?
Wowza. I mean, I guess it depends on the level of restrictions and regulations. I think, look, again, it's going to depend on where and what the regulation is. I think as we learn to live alongside COVID, we all know that there will be certain concessions that we're going to have to make in the way that we run our events, and crowd density modelling is going to be part of that. However, that's not to say that you're going to lose anything. I think you just have to think about it in a different approach. So as we, what's the most frustrating thing when you attend events? There's never anywhere to sit. You've always got a queue to get your badge in the morning, all of that stuff. So why don't you flip that on your head and imagine that actually, hey, with contact-free registration and contactless registration, you will no longer have to queue because you'll be able to get straight in and everything's on your own device. And then when you come to have your lunch break, because maybe the lunch breaks are staggered, hey, guess what? Suddenly the queue's shorter and you're guaranteed a seat, because with social distancing, there's got to be enough seating and lots of smaller seating areas rather than pushing everyone to one area. So I think it is a lot around the approach. If you speak to your exhibitors and understand their kind of objectives for taking a stand, depending on the show, it could be anything from simple brand awareness to networking to product sales to whatever. So you have to make sure that whatever the measures you're putting in can play to those objectives as well. People want quality audience. That's not going to go away. And so by refining that and by looking at how that works, understanding the dwell times of your visitors as well. So hopefully that will get away from, that last 2 hours on the last day of the show being really quiet and everyone just wants to pack up. Wouldn't it be great if actually we had a more consistent number of visitors throughout the entire duration of an exhibition? When we look at content, rather than it, having to fit 300-400 people into a keynote theatre, and then everyone, there's always that person that arrives late and there's nowhere to sit. Wouldn't it be great if it was available in a way that meant that people could drop in and out according to their schedule, according to their availability, and it wouldn't feel awkward? So I think there are pluses. It's almost just, glass half full versus glass half empty in some instances. And ultimately, we have to still have faith in the fact that Boris himself said there's no substitute for face-to-face. We all know that. So do you know what? If there's a couple of regulations that we have to meet along the way, it's going to be no different to what we're doing in our day-to-day lives. And we still want to meet in person.
Safe as standard. That is how I describe our industry. Guys, we've run out of time, so I'm going to draw a line under it there. I'm sorry if we didn't get a chance to answer all of your questions, audience, but there's some lovely ones out there. I'm going to take this opportunity to thank our panel of Chris, Kerrie and Nick. Thank you very much. And thank you, audience, for joining us. Come back rather at 2:25 for our final session of the day.